I came across, I don't remember where I heard it, but I remember somebody saying that the number one rule in improv comedy is never say no. Because as you're going along, it kills all the creativity. Because all of a sudden you have to, everybody has to pause and kind of reboot what they were thinking if you shut something down. So it's like, oh, we're going to go to the arcade. No, I don't want to go to the arcade. Well, then what? Nobody knows where to go. So it's hard to hear no. And if you recall those old Whose Line Is It Anyway movies, there was one particular game that they would do where the host could buzz, and basically the buzzer was a no, and the comedian had to change his response. And those were the ones where they seemed to struggle the most. And these are professional improv comics, Ryan Stiles and Wayne Brady and those guys. And whenever they hit the buzzer, you could almost see like a mime hitting their invisible wall and going, okay, now I have to redirect. So no can sometimes get in the way, can't it? Yeah. You're driving down the road, and statistically, how many more stoplights do you hit than green lights?
5 times more.
5 times more. Okay, that's your impression. Statistically, you hit the same number of stoplights as you do green lights. Why do we think of the stoplights more? Because it interrupts you, right? Yeah. And so, but no is an important thing. We need to say no. Parents say no to children to keep them safe. Our government has to say no to us so that they can maintain rule and order. A doctor may have to tell you no so you can be healthy and recover. Sometimes God says no. And that's what we're going to be talking about this morning. We don't like no, but no is important. And we're going to see God telling Moses no in our passage in Deuteronomy chapter 3. So if you will, please read with me from Deuteronomy chapter 3, verse 23. This is Moses speaking, and he says, "And I pleaded with Yahweh at that time, saying, O Lord Yahweh, you have only begun to show your servant your greatness and your mighty hand. For what God is there in heaven and on earth who can do such works and mighty acts as yours? Please, 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 let me go over and see the good land beyond the Jordan, that good hill country in Lebanon." Verse 26, "But Yahweh was angry with me because of you," the Israelites, not you guys, "and would not listen to me. And Yahweh said to me, Enough from you. Do not speak to me of this matter again. Go up to the top of Pisgah and lift up your eyes westward and northward and southward and eastward, and look at it with your eyes, for you shall not go over this Jordan. But charge Joshua and encourage and strengthen him, for he shall go over at the head of this people, and he shall put them in possession of the land that you shall see." Father God, as we explore your word, I ask that you would open our hearts and minds to receive all that you would speak with great humility and with great openness, and that we would trust you when your answer is no, that we would continue to listen to what you would say after that, and as we hear what you continue to say, that we would be obedient and we would continue to trust you and to call upon your name. We love you, we bless you, and we praise you. Amen. So everyone say this with me. When God says no, keep listening, keep obeying, and keep praying. Okay, can we remember those 3 keeps? Yeah. You guys remember those old tracker keepers? Those binders that were really fancy in 6th grade? Yeah. So this is like the 3-folder tracker keeper. We're going to keep praying, or keep listening, keep obeying, and keep praying. So in this short little dialogue, Moses is, actually it's not short, Moses is giving a 34-chapter speech to the Israelites on the plains of Moab as they're about to go into the promised land, because God told him, you can't go in. And so Moses is going, well, if I can't go in, then I'm going to preach the longest sermon ever and delay as long as I can so I can see as much as I can before I finally have to be gathered with my fathers. And Moses is praying, he's pleading, he's entreating God on behalf of his mercy and his grace. And if you remember back to Exodus 34:6, that's what God revealed himself to be. The Lord, merciful and gracious. And so Moses, in his pleading, in his entreating, saying, God, because you're merciful and because you're gracious, will you please, please, please remove the consequence from me so I can go and enter the land? This is what I've been hoping for. This is what I've been longing for. When I was 40 years old and I killed the Egyptian and trying to save Israel on my own strength, it was because you had this promise to Abraham and to Isaac and to Jacob. And then when I ran away to the wilderness for 40 years, and at 80 years old, I see you in a burning bush, and you say, go and deliver my people. This is what you told me we would do. And then now, 40 years after that, I'm 120 years old. I've been hoping for this my entire life. And yes, I had that issue with the rock. We'll get to that in a moment. But please, oh God, that couldn't be any worse than the golden calf and complaining about food in the wilderness and throwing manna back in your face and all the things that we saw in Numbers. God, will you please, 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 please let me in? Because you are merciful and gracious. And yet, God's answer is still going to be no. And we'll get to why here in a little bit. But he's calling upon God's name. He's calling upon God's reputation of faithfulness that he has seen throughout his life. And he praises God. In Deuteronomy 3:24, Moses declares, O Lord God, O Lord Yahweh, you have only begun to show your servant your greatness and your mighty hand. Now pause for a second and let's think about all the things Moses has seen. Moses knows the story of the basket in the Nile River. Right? His mother was able to nurse him, so she probably told him how God saved him and gave him this, at least the seed of a vision for what God wanted to do in his life in delivering Israel. Then Moses comes back and he witnesses the imminent presence of God in a bush that does not burn up. Then he does the signs. He throws a stick on the ground and becomes a snake. He puts his hand inside his cloak and it becomes leprous. He is able to pour water out from the river and it becomes blood. So he shows those signs to the Israelites and they go, okay, you're legit. Go talk to Pharaoh. He goes and talks to Pharaoh. Pharaoh's heart is hardened. And so Moses starts just doing the things God says. And he sees more water turn into blood. He sees frogs come. He sees flies come. He sees gnats come. He sees locusts come. He sees hail and brimstone rain down from heaven. He sees all the cattle die of disease. He sees darkness cover over the land. He sees the firstborn of all of Israel, or not Israel, Egypt. Let's get that right. The firstborn of Egypt pass away. And there's one more plague I forgot, but I'm not going to go back and find it. So he's seen all these things. He has seen God split a sea in half and the people walking through. He has seen bread rain down from heaven. He has seen water gush out from a piece of granite. And I don't know if you've ever split a granite rock in half, you just get 2 granite rocks. Okay. He has seen God bring quail to feed 2.x million people. Enough quail where it came up to their waist throughout the entire camp, and they ate it for 30 days straight. He saw God bring his judgment, and he saw God relent from judgment. He saw Aaron go with his censer between the living and the dead and stop God's plague. Moses held the bronze serpent in the air and stopped God's plague a different time when the Israelites rebelled. Moses saw God defeat the enemies as Aaron and Hur held his arms up above the battle as it was raging down at the base of the mountain. Moses has seen a lot in his life. And yet he calls it basically not the prequel, but the preview of all that God is going to continue to do. And it's like, God, that preview was so good, I'm going to stay up at midnight. As soon as the tickets are released, I'm buying the IMAX theater tickets because I want the biggest, baddest show that you can put on. Have you guys ever done that? The movie premiere coming out, so you pay like $40,000 extra to get in first. It might not be $40,000, but it certainly feels like it, right? Well, when you buy popcorn, it is. So Moses wants to see the future attraction. He's not ready to let go of all the things that God has shown him. And And then he goes on with his praise. He says, God, there is nobody in all the cosmos that can compare to you. You're incomparable. There is no power in the universe that can do what you did. There is no power in the universe that can defeat you. God, you are the one who can, and the only one, by the way, who can let me go into that land. All you got to do is just turn the exit sign into an open sign, and I'm going. And in Deuteronomy chapter 10, as Moses is continuing to speak to the Israelites and encouraging them to listen and obey all that God has commanded and to circumcise their hearts and to follow God with all that they are, he states, for Yahweh your God is the God of gods. That means he's the ruler God over everything else that can exist. He is the Lord of lords, the great, the mighty, the awesome God who is not partial and takes no bribe. And this may, in fact, be a reference back to Numbers chapter 14, 17 and 19, where Moses, in the time of the people's rebellion, where they're not going to go into the land, even though Caleb and Joshua said, no, it's good, go do it. And he says, and now please let the power of the Lord be great, as you've promised. And God's power in this passage is expressed in his mercy and his grace. So notice, Moses in Numbers 14:18 is going to quote back to Exodus 34. The Lord is slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love. And so in Numbers, Moses is saying, hey, because you're gracious, because you're compassionate, don't wipe out these people, but continue going with them. And here in Deuteronomy, it's very possible Moses is thinking about that and going, God, you are so powerful. You can forgive an entire nation that rebelled against you. Will you please forgive me? Let me go into the land. And that's his request in Deuteronomy 3:25. Please, Lord, let me go over and see this good land. See the land that you promised to Abraham and to Isaac and to Jacob. The land that we have been waiting for 400 years of Egyptian slavery and then 400 years of wilderness wanderings. And the reason that Moses can't go in is found in Numbers chapter 20. Here we've come to the end of story after story after story after story of the people grumbling against Moses. And we talked about a lot of those last week. And here the people are without water. And so again, they start to grumble and they start to murmur against Moses and Aaron. And if you've been a manager or a supervisor or a boss and you heard your employees just get on your case and get on your case and get on your case over and over and over, there comes a point where your fuse runs to its end point, right? Or as a parent, you're telling your kids the same thing over and over 100 times a day, which is not an exaggeration. And finally it just gets to a point where it's like, okay, enough. And Moses had enough in Numbers chapter 20. And he just lets into the people. He calls them rebels. He's supposed to speak to the rock, but instead he takes the staff and he hits the rock twice to bring water forth. And he even says, are we the ones in Numbers? Oh, I didn't write it down. Okay. Are we the ones to bring forth water for you? In other words, in his moment of anger, he's actually put himself in the place of God. God was to bring water for the people, not Moses. And at this point in the story of Numbers 20, the exact nature of Moses' sin isn't known. It's been debated for centuries, and that's purposeful in the biblical narrative because the Bible will give us just enough detail to know what's going on, but not enough detail so we can excuse ourselves from responsibility. And so as we're reading that, we go, I can totally relate to Moses. I don't really know what he did, but I can put myself in his shoes, and I can learn from that. And in Numbers 20, verse 12, we see God's judgment on Moses. God speaks, and he says, because you did not believe in me to uphold me as holy in the eyes of the people of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land that I have given them. There was something in the way that Moses reflected God to the people that did not reflect God well. And in Moses' position of authority, and all that Moses knew and what he was we are responsible for what we know. Moses speaks to God face to face. The glory of God radiated off of his face as he came down from the mountain out of the tent of meeting. So much so that the people asked him to put a veil over it when he wasn't speaking to them. And it was this kind of reflection that gets tainted. And so God, who is a just God, has said, I'm sorry, but Moses, just like everybody else in your generation, you can't go in. As we come back to Deuteronomy chapter 3, the word pleaded in verse 23 indicates that this wasn't the first time Moses asked. It wasn't like Numbers 20 happened, and then he's wandering in the wilderness for 40 years, and then he gets to the doorstep of the promised land, and he's like, oh yeah, I just remembered, I left my keys at home. God, will you go get my keys? Like, can you? It wasn't that kind of a thing. Moses had been asking and begging to grant for God to let him get into the promised land. It's like those kids say, can I? And when the parent goes, no, for the 1,000th time, no. And they're like, okay, well, what about in 5 minutes? Can I have it in 5 minutes? 30 seconds? What about tomorrow? What about next week? And there comes a point where you're just like, no. The answer is no, stop, right? And that's God's answer. It hasn't changed from Numbers 20. In Deuteronomy 3:26, Moses shares God's response, and he says, Yahweh was angry with me because of you and would not listen to me. And Yahweh said to me, enough from you. Do not speak to me of this matter again. And commentator Bill Arnold notes that God's response here to Moses suggests that Moses has been persistently making his request. More than enough time has passed for talking about whether or not Moses will go into the promised land. The conversation is over. Enough already. It's the parent who's like, I've heard you. The answer is still no. The answer will always be no. And if you ask again, I'm going to say no to a whole bunch of other stuff. Have you ever gotten to that point? You just start saying no for the sake of saying no? I just thought of this. Tim Hawkins has a brilliant skit on how to say no to kids. Where he just, all the different creative ways that parents can say no to kids. I wish I would have pulled that video up. Missed opportunity. Anyway, but God says no, and he's firm on that. Christopher Wright notes, since Moses' purpose was to exhort the new generation not to go on failing as their parents had done, one can understand why his reference to his own exclusion, which means God telling him no, dwells on the people's part but omits his own. What Christopher Wright is saying is, if you notice in verse 26, Moses says, Yahweh was angry at me because of you. What Moses is not doing is he's saying, it was not my fault. Moses has to take responsibility for his own actions. But because Moses' purpose is to teach this second generation of freed Israelites how to follow Yahweh, he's emphasizing the role of their parents. And he's basically saying, don't grow up to be like your parents. You know those, there's an auto insurance commercial where it's like, we don't want to become like our parents. So you have these guys that are, now I'm blanking on it. Anyway, but you've seen where you're like, I would never wear my socks up to my knees on the outside of my pants. And then 40 years later, you're wearing your socks up to your knees on the outside of your pants. You're going, what are you doing? Or we've seen some people where they wear socks and sandals. And then there comes that one cold day where you're like, you know what? Dad was pretty smart. And you put your socks on with your sandals, so you go take out the trash, and then your neighbors are like, I don't want to become like that old guy. Moses is trying to tell this second generation of Israelites, look, don't become like your parents. Learn the ways of Yahweh, trust him, and obey him. That's the whole purpose of Deuteronomy. And so Christopher Wright continues, and he says, though not without fault himself, Moses was bearing the punishment of his own generation along with them, and bearing the punishment that even the following generation should have had. Nobody deserved to go into the land, and Moses' death outside of the land would be a witness to the reality of God's judgment just as Joshua's victorious entry into the land would be a witness to the reality of God's loving and forgiving covenant grace. So judgment and grace are interwoven here. We have to embrace the fullness of God's character, like we've talked about before. Remember, that's that second part of God's revelation in Exodus 34, verse 7, that God will by no means clear the guilty. And so we see in Moses' experience that he's got to see a lot of God's compassion and grace. But right here, God has to be just as well. And Bill Arnold writes that this paragraph here in Deuteronomy 3 illustrates that although Moses has Yahweh's overall favor, that's not to say that God will grant his every request. J. Gary Miller writes, Yahweh's response here is completely predictable. And here's why. Because it is completely consistent with everything that we have seen about prayer in the opening books of the Bible. Prayer is inherently covenantal. Remember, we're calling upon God's name to fulfill his promises. God has revealed his name to us because he is the one who has made the promises, and he has staked them on his name, his reputation. He will do what he says he will do. Moses' prayer, however, it's Moses' own personal desire to go into the land. If Moses doesn't go into the land, God's promises don't change. They don't get affected. So Moses isn't praying, God, fulfill your promises. Moses is praying, God, I really want to go into the land. There's that difference there. And this is an argument from silence, but if you notice in Moses' prayer, he doesn't actually mention the promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He mentions God's great power and that there is no other God that can do the things that Yahweh does. But it's not based on God's promise, because God is already fulfilling his promise, and he will do so through Joshua. So there are a lot of times in life that we hear no, whether from God or from people. And when that happens, we're tempted to turn our ears off and stop listening. We can get frustrated, we can get angry, we can get upset, we can feel offended, we can get bitter, and we stop listening. We didn't get what we want or what we hoped for, and in our disappointment, we turn away. Dejected, we go and we lick our wounds. We have our pity party, and we settle for what we think is our lot in life. And yet, that's not what Moses does. Because if we turn our ears off, then we miss out on God's ongoing purposes. Because remember, God is faithful, and he will do what he says he will do. I am who I am. I will be who I will be. And so God's promises aren't going to stop even though Moses can't go into the land. And so God continues to speak. And he tells Moses the next things to do. As Bill Arnold notes, rather than a simple no answer, Yahweh responds with a clear-eyed set of specific steps for Moses to follow in order to complete his charge. As often happens in Scripture and in our own lives, God's response to Moses' prayer redirects the conversation. If Moses doesn't keep listening after God says no, then he misses out on the next thing that God says. Another way to put it is, God's no is often a yes to something else. And we need to keep listening when God says no so we know what his yes is going to be. And so when God says no, we keep listening. Everybody say, keep listening. Good, you're listening. So Moses can't go in, but he can see in. He gets to window shop on the promised land. Isn't that that would be cool enough, right? To just be able to window shop into the promised land. And that's Deuteronomy 3:27. God tells Moses, go up to the top of Mount Pisgah and lift up your eyes westward and northward and southward and eastward and look at it with your eyes, for you shall not go over this Jordan. So God has given Moses a partial yes. Moses asked, can I go in and can I see? And God has said, yes, you can see. But not only that, if we trace Moses' life before that, we see that he's actually already seen a lot of what God is going to be doing in the promised land. He has come through the waters by God's mighty hand, just like Joshua will lead the people across the river. He has defeated the enemies of God in battle, just like Joshua will defeat the enemies of God in battle through supernatural ways. Moses has been able to witness at least part of the land, what we call the Transjordan area, the part where Israel is still at. And then they're going to cross the Jordan, and then they're going to take the rest of the land. So Moses has already kind of had that preview, so to speak, of what God is doing. And so God has actually honored the intent of Moses' prayer, and yet is still able to maintain his justice and his righteousness. And so he's saying, yes, Moses, you'll get to see it. I will offer you that. You've seen my glory. I will offer you the chance to see the glory of the land that I am giving. And then Moses also needs to prepare Joshua. In Deuteronomy 3:28, God tells Moses, "But charge Joshua and encourage and strengthen him, for he shall go over at the head of his people, and he shall put them in possession of the land that you shall see." And this is an answer to prayer, actually. If you jump back into Numbers chapter 27, this is another occasion where God tells Moses he cannot go into the land. In response to this, Moses prays in Numbers 27:15-17, speaking to Yahweh, saying, "Let the Lord, the God of the spirits of all flesh, appoint a man over the congregation, who shall go out before them and come in before them, who shall lead them out and bring them in, that the congregation of the Lord may not be as sheep that have no shepherd." So Moses has already prayed, God, would you provide a successor for me? And right here in Numbers 27, God says, yeah, go get Joshua. He's my guy. Jump forward to Deuteronomy and says, hey, you can't go in, but remember, I've already answered that first prayer. Go get Joshua. He's my guy. It's not enough for Joshua just to have been selected, but Moses' leadership now has to transfer over to him so that all the people of Israel know Joshua's in the lead now. Joshua's going to carry the flag. Joshua's at the start of the line. Joshua's going to be the one who goes into the tent of meeting and hears Yahweh and knows what Yahweh is saying. Because honestly, if Joshua did not have that moment in which all of Israel is standing around and sees Moses lay his hands on Joshua and say, this is the appointed leader, the anointed person who will go before you, then when Joshua says, hey guys, let's march around Jericho 7 times, the people are probably going to scratch their heads, turn their head like a dog, and go, what are you talking about? That is the worst battle strategy ever. And yet, it's essential for the next step in God fulfilling his promises to have a leader before the people. If Moses can't go in, then the people need to have somebody. Because we find out in the book of Judges that when there was no king in the land, the people did according to what they felt was right. And that ended really, 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 really badly. Mark E. Biddle states, Moses has been the only leader Israel has ever known. And now, at the crucial moment of entry into the promised land, Israel must go on without him. Israel must face the perils awaiting them in Canaan without Moses' wisdom and intimate knowledge of the divine will. Deuteronomy, then, is the response to this crisis of leadership. Although Moses can't enter the land with Israel, he can leave them with an extensive statement of his insights into the Torah. And that's Deuteronomy, the second law. So Moses is going to give this whole speech, 34 chapters worth, of saying, here's what God has done. Here's what God is saying to you right now so you know how to follow in his ways as you cross this Jordan. And Joshua is the one who's going to lead you. By the way, Joshua, you need to know all this stuff too so you can lead well. Moses continued listening to God. He knew that his job wasn't done until the next leader was in place. And his job wasn't done until he explained to the next generation how they can follow Yahweh faithfully. There are times when we know that we keep listening, which is good, but sometimes the pain of hearing no can be so great that we don't actually want to do the next thing. You've had that sometimes where we say, especially with kids, we're like, no, you can't go to your friend's house, but we really do need you to clean your room. That doesn't go over very well in most families, right? Or no, you can't go over to your friends, but we are going to go and see Grandma and Grandpa. No offense to Grandma and Grandpa, but sometimes friends are better. They can run faster, they can climb higher, they can go down slides face first, just sometimes friends can, they know how to play video games, no offense, but I can't play video games all that well, so I'm in your boat, don't worry. But that sometimes hearing no can be a great temptation to not follow through on the next thing God has said. Or it can be like the feeling of getting passed over for a promotion at work or being forced into retirement, but before you go, you have to train the person replacing you, right? Or you have to train the person who's going to be your boss. And you're like, I've been in the company for 20 years. He just got out of college. Why am I training? And just, I don't know how those decisions get made, but sometimes it can feel that way. And Moses may have felt that way, like, God, look at my resume. I have 40 years in the wilderness with Midian, okay? I know how to navigate that. I have 40 more years working with this people. I know how to navigate that. I talked to you face to face. Sure, Joshua hung out in the tent doing coloring books in the back. I don't know what he did. But I talked to you face to face, okay? And God says, nope, we need to pass that baton. And Moses, in his humility, says, hey, Joshua, get over here. We got some things to talk to you about. And we have to remember that in the Bible, hearing without doing is not hearing at all. And so if we really are going to keep on listening when God says no, then when God says no, we need to keep on obeying. We need to keep doing the things that God has shown us, that God has spoken to us. And so Moses grabs Joshua and he commissions him more than once, actually. In Numbers 27, 22 and 23, Moses did as Yahweh commanded him. He took Joshua and made him stand before Eleazar, the priest, and the whole congregation. So this is a public acknowledgement of Moses saying, Joshua is going to succeed me. You need to listen to him. And Moses laid his hands on him, which is an act of prayer and an act of giving authority to. And so all that Yahweh directed, Moses did. This was kind of like Joshua's inauguration day, where the president would stand up on, was it January 16, January 24? I don't know, some cold day. I don't know why they picked the coldest day of the year to stand outside, but they did. Welcome to America. And it takes the oath of office. Like, yes, I will swear to protect this nation. I will uphold the Constitution. I will do all these things. That's what Joshua is doing right now in the book of Numbers. And then Moses teaches Joshua and the people. The entire book of Deuteronomy is basically Moses' last will and testament. Do these things and you will live. God has set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Choose life. Obey Yahweh. Follow in his commands. I have given you 34 chapters of what it looks like to obey God's commands. Just do these things. And you better believe Joshua was sitting front row in Moses' class, taking notes on how to lead this people. Moses charges Joshua. He encourages and he strengthens him just like God tells him. In Deuteronomy 3, if we jump back a little bit, in Deuteronomy chapter 3, we see that God had commanded Joshua at that time, and Joshua was one whose eyes has seen all that the Lord your God has done to these two kings. And so Yahweh will do to all the kingdoms that they're crossing. And so I kind of go back there just to show Moses asked to see, Moses was allowed to see, but Joshua was the one who saw and would go into and get the up-close and personal view. And then in Deuteronomy chapter 31, Moses, after his big, long speech, brings Joshua to him, and he says to him in the sight of all Israel, be strong and courageous, for you shall go into with this people into the land that Yahweh has sworn to their fathers. And right there is covenant language. The land that God had promised to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob will be given to the people through Joshua's leadership. God is continuing to fulfill his promise, even though his answer to Moses is no. And Moses continues speaking to Joshua and says, "You shall put them in possession of it. It is Yahweh who goes before you. He will be with you. He will not leave you nor forsake you. Do not fear or be dismayed." And then, as that's being spoken before all of the nation, then Joshua gets brought before the Lord. And the Lord says to Moses in Deuteronomy 31, 14, 15, and 23, "Behold, the days approach, Moses, when you must die. So call Joshua and present yourselves in the tent of meeting." So we had the political handoff of authority in Numbers 27. We have the sort of religious ceremony before all the nation in confirming Joshua has God's blessing spoken over him. And now they are going into God's presence where God himself will commission Joshua. And Moses is leading all of these events. Moses and Joshua went and presented themselves in the tent of meeting. Verse 15, chapter 31. "And Yahweh appeared in the tent of meeting in a pillar of cloud, and the pillar of cloud stood over the entrance of the tent." Verse 23, "And Yahweh commissioned Joshua the son of Nun and said, 'Be strong and courageous, for you shall bring the people of Israel into the land that I swore to give them. I will be with you.'" You guys know it's one thing to have a person speak encouragement to you. It's another thing to hear God's voice himself. Joshua gets the blessing of both, and it's because Moses is faithful. Moses is willing to accept no from God, but he doesn't stop there. He continues listening, and when he hears the next step that God has given him, he obeys those steps and following through and preparing Joshua to lead. And in Deuteronomy 34:9, we see the result of this. "Joshua the son of Nun was full of the spirit of wisdom," aka the Spirit of God, "for Moses had laid his hands on him. So the people of Israel obeyed Joshua and did as the Lord had commanded Moses." When you turn to the end of the book of Joshua, you see that not only did the people obey Joshua as they went into the land right away, but throughout Joshua's life, he led them in following in the ways of Yahweh. So even though God's answer to Moses wasn't what Moses wanted, it continued fulfilling the promise given to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It continued the promise of giving them the land through which they could be a blessing to the families of the earth. So even though the answer to Moses' specific prayer was no, God's ultimate answer was yes. Yes, I will fulfill my promises to my people, and I will work in a way that is different than you expect, but will still accomplish all that you desire. And so when God says no, we keep listening, we keep obeying, and finally we keep praying. We keep calling on God to fulfill his promises. And in Deuteronomy chapter 33, we don't have time to go through all of it, but Moses speaks in the name of Yahweh over each and every tribe of Israel. As they're going to go into the land, he speaks blessing over them. He speaks prosperity over them. He speaks blessing over them so that they could share that blessing to the nations. In Psalm 90, and we don't know where this occurs in the timeline of Moses' life, but we have a record of Moses' prayer, again, calling on God to be faithful to his people. If we skip ahead to the New Testament, we see that we can pray for the Spirit's help, because we don't always know what God's immediate or direct will might be in a current situation. And Paul writes, "Likewise, the Spirit helps us in our weakness, for we don't know what to pray for as we ought, but the Spirit himself intercedes with us with a groaning too deep for words. And he who searches hearts knows what the mind of the Spirit is, because the Spirit intercedes for the saints according to the will of God." So when we don't know what to pray, and we feel like God, every single time we're throwing a prayer out there, we're getting no, we can step back and go, God, let's pray something else. Instead of asking God a yes-no question, we can ask God, what are you doing question? And those tend to get better answers anyway. God, can I do this? Yes. Well, guess what? How do I do it? The yes, no always has a bunch of follow-up questions. But God draws us into a deeper relationship with him by saying, hey, ask me those open-ended questions. God, what are you doing in the city of Lowell? God, what are you doing in our communities? God, what are you doing at my workplace? Where can I see you working? God, I feel like you're saying no to this opportunity, and I don't understand why. Will you help me to see what you're doing so I can embrace the next step and know your purposes? We can ask for discernment. In James 4:3, we read, as he's challenging his readers, that they ask or they pray and they do not receive because they ask wrongly. And so we can ask, God, will you search the motives of our heart? Because sometimes we get confused. We can really, really, really want something, and we can think that the thing we want must also be the thing God wants. And we say, God, will you help me to just discern? Where's my heart on this? J. Gary Miller writes in kind of summarizing this chapter on prayer in the Pentateuch. He says, of course, there are times when what we long for and what may be good for the growth of the kingdom overlap. So, i.e., Abraham's servant's prayer for a wife for Isaac. And it's not always easy to discern what is best for the work of the gospel in the world. This passage should not lead us into the paralysis that comes from endless self-examination and a desire to pray with pure motives. But it is also equally clear that sometimes we pray for what we want without any thought or reference to the glory of God. And so the antidote to that is to just pause and say, God, just search my heart for a little bit. When I was seeking the baptism of the Holy Spirit and trying to figure out how to pray in tongues, I was so worried that I would offend God by making random syllables up, because that's what tongues basically sounds like, random syllables. And so I just had somebody at our church at the time just encourage me, hey, just go home and in your prayer time, just experiment. Like, it's okay. You're seeking the good things of God. And for 3 months, I would go and I'd get a couple of syllables out, and I would go, okay, Lord, please forgive me. I'm sorry if I shamed you and have blasphemed your name and all this stuff. And finally, 3 months later, it dawned on me, I don't feel any conviction as I'm doing this. God hasn't said no. And so that was the discernment God gave me as I've been praying. Lord, help me to know that this is right and what you have given me. And once that clicked, all of a sudden, I could pray freely. We can pray and ask God for that discernment. There have been other times where we've experienced no. Around 2017, Amanda and I were kind of transitioning out of my position at North Point, and we were looking at different churches and kind of going, God, where should we go? And we got a whole bunch of no's in that season, and we were confused. Sometimes we'd get a phone call, and I knew right when I picked up the phone call I needed to say no, and I was like, God, but I don't. Why? Why? And God didn't always tell me why, but He did tell me the next step. The one time we had met with the board a couple of times. They had us spend the night in the parsonage and all this stuff, and I felt really good about it. And all of a sudden, they called me and said no. And I was like, God, this doesn't make any sense. What happened? And God's answer was very simply, I work through people. Because God partners with people, sometimes people get it wrong. I could have gotten it wrong, or it could have been that church could have gotten it wrong, but God works through people, and we have to be humble enough and recognize, sometimes we just make a mistake, and God's big enough to navigate those. Back in 2009, 2010, I had just freshly graduated from Michigan State, had my teaching certificate, and I was going to be a band director, and I had an interview lined up in Indiana, so it would have been like a 3 or 4 hour drive to go to the interview. And about 10 minutes before I walk out the door of my house, I get a call from Godfrey Early Childhood Center saying, "Hey, we want you to be the reading the Title I Parapro." The job's yours if you want it, because you've subbed here enough, you don't even have to interview. We're offering it to you. And at that moment, I was like, okay, but God, I spent 13 years playing trombone, 5 years racking up tens of thousands of dollars of debt so I could wave a stick at teenagers. Like, God, what? And in that moment, I knew beyond the shadow of a doubt that music was no, and for whatever reason, I had to stay in West Michigan. I didn't understand why. So I just said, okay, God, I feel like you're saying no to this interview in Indiana. So I called him up and said, hey, I've chosen to accept another position here in Michigan, so I won't be coming to the interview. Just wanted to let you know. So I wasn't a no-show. And I ended up taking way less pay because a full-time teacher makes way more than a part-time parapro. But it was through that obedience and trusting in God where I stayed in West Michigan. I got to go to North Point. I got to meet my wife. I got to get launched into ministry, and here we are. And if I didn't accept God's no, today doesn't happen. At least it doesn't look the same. A no to one thing is often a yes to something else. And when it's God working, that something else is often much, much better. And so, yes, there are times where we'll pray and we'll be seeking, we'll be asking, and God says no. And when God says no, we keep listening. Because God doesn't usually speak in one-word sentences. I mean, He's got 1,500 pages in this thing, right? You think I'm long-winded. God is more. We keep listening. And when we hear God's ongoing direction, then we keep obeying. And through it all, we keep praying because God will fulfill His promises. Jesus has come. Jesus has died. Jesus has risen from the dead. Jesus has yet to return. And so we keep praying, God, fulfill your promises. Send your Spirit out into all the nations, and every nation, every tongue, every people, and every tribe will worship you and proclaim your name around your throne. So that when Jesus comes, He can receive to Himself the kingdom you promised to Him, and that all the heavens and all the earth will be renewed. When God says no, we keep listening, we keep obeying, and we keep praying. As we close, I want to give some time and some space because I think we've all at one point or another have experienced God saying no. And I want to make myself available that if you're in that moment where you're like, I feel I've been praying and praying and praying and praying, and I feel like God has said no, or I had this dream years ago, and I feel like God has said no, we want to pray with you on that God would help you to hear what those next steps are. Or, in the case of Abraham, the answer that we interpret no is really just a not yet. And God's timing has to be right. So we just want to make ourselves available to you after we speak the blessing over you. So Father God, we thank you for your word. We thank you that you answer us. God, you never leave a prayer unanswered, even if the answer has to be no. You always speak to us. You have ears to hear, and you have a mouth that speaks. Thank you, God. And Lord, we ask that you would grant us the grace to follow you faithfully, to accept your wisdom that is beyond our own, to know that we can trust you even when the answer is no. To know that we can continue asking for clarity and direction, and you will lead us and guide us according to your great way. God, we ask for the strength and the courage to press on in obedience, even in those hard moments where we're training our future boss. God, you are good. You are faithful. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine on you and be gracious unto you. May he lift his countenance over you and give you peace in all that you do. And may you receive especially profound peace in those times and instances when God's answer is no. And may he show himself faithful in all things as you continue seeking him and calling upon his name.